Hello, and welcome back to the Near Spiritual Awakening podcast with Dr. Val, aka Moi. It's been a minute. Exactly, it's been about 3 weeks since I published the last episode, and some of you may be like, what happened? We love the weekly. I love the weekly too, but you know what? I actually did record an episode with the lovely Dr. Tarshini, who I will have back on the show because we didn't get to publish that recording just because, Mercury retrograde vibes, the technology wasn't supportive of us on the day, so I'll have to reinvite her. Nonetheless, I thought I'd invite a solo, I would not invite, but record a solo podcast episode to fill you in on what's been going on. So, what's been going on, of course, I just said Mercury retrograde. It is when Mercury, the planet of communication, stuff like that, goes retrograde. And for me, as a Cancerian, where's my fellow Cancerians out there? It is very, very, it's like a time of deep reflection, but also transformation. So maybe the last three Mercury retrogrades have been utterly and mostly transformative for me, and transformation isn't always pretty. It kind of, it's like turning from a cocoon into a butterfly, literally metamorphosis, however you want to say that. But it ain't pretty. So during that time, I didn't record any episodes, all right? Probably a good thing I didn't, because I wasn't necessarily in the most, delighted or delightful space. So of course, why would I taint that with into my podcast? So here we are. Now that I've said that, it's a new day and age. Literally, this is August 11th. Mercury retrograde is over. And also, let me just rewind a little. I don't want to bag Mercury retrograde, okay? It's not a bad thing. I'm actually really thankful for it. And now that I know how I am during those times, I can prepare myself for it, and I do. So one of the actions that I take is I don't overschedule um, my roster, or I don't overly exert myself during the time just because I know, hey, this time's going to be full on. All right. Now, where were we? Okay. So what I want to talk about in this episode, what I am going to speak about in this episode is epigenetics. So I know we covered a little bit of the limbic system, neuroplasticity in the last solo episode, but in this episode, I really want to delve into this arena of epigenetics. In case you have never heard of the term, epigenetics is the phenomenon of our DNA being expressed differentially according to our environment. So let me say that in another way. Epigenetics is the idea that our genes, our DNA, get expressed differently depending on what environment we find ourselves in or place ourselves in. Okay, if that didn't make sense to you, no stress. Let me give you an example. A recent example of epigenetics is I went to the local gallery, all right, the National Gallery of Victoria. As you know, I live in Melbourne, and I saw the Impressionist exhibit, and it was just beautiful. I mean, you have your Monets, you have your Pissarro, Renoir, all those incredible, incredible Impressionists of that era. And what I noticed was, in fact, epigenetics. So let me let me zoom in even more. You know the little blurbs between the paintings that tell you like who painted it, what was happening at the time? I actually read those this time around. And what I saw was a prime example of epigenetics. These artists were talking about each other in a very inspiring manner. Monet would say, "Oh, Cézanne or Gauguin were really, pivotal in my career. I look up to them. They're really, amazing." And that would in turn impact his own art. And of course, we know Monet is one of the most incredible impressionist artists of all times. The Monet Gardens, which were at that exhibit, was just like, wow. And and they were also physically located in proximity of one another. So they all flocked to, l'École des Beaux-Arts or an art school in somewhere in Paris or in its vicinity, and they would paint these incredible things, but they were all together. We say we bounce ideas off another, but that's an example of epigenetics, is us socially or them socially coming together and then relating to one another, inspiring one another in a way so that their talent flourished and they got to produce these incredible pieces of art that lasted through generations. I mean, some of these paintings, right? At least the ones I saw, they're from the 1800s. So they survived World War One, World War Two. I mean, all sorts of famines. They were passed down from owner to owner to, now they're being loaned to the gallery. So how incredible is that? And that's just one non-conventional example of epigenetics where wherever we surround ourselves with people, places, things, environments that are supportive of us expressing the best work that we have to offer, it works. It works in our favor. And of course, in the favor of other people, because 300 years down the line, here we are, savoring the product of those artists, you know. Wow. Okay, so that's just one example of epigenetics. But if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty details, you should definitely do the Neuroplasticity and Epigenetics course that I offer. I'm about to launch a new program at the end of September, so be sure to check it out. But I'll give you as much as I can right now without the graphics, without the slides. But let's not say, but it is a fact that we do have our DNA, the DNA that we inherit from both of our parents, one strand from each parent. However, not all of our DNA gets expressed. In our DNA, it's a double helix, it's a beautiful molecule, the structure of it, and then the DNA itself coils around other proteins like histones. And not all DNA gets expressed. In fact, 98 to 98% of our DNA is non-coding. What does that mean? Well, it means the genes, the genetic material, the code, doesn't actually get transcribed or translated into a protein. A protein is a viable molecule which we can visualize at least with a microscope, if not with a naked eye. And so if a gene is not turned into a protein, what does it do? And 98% to 99% of our DNA is non-coding. It doesn't actually become a thing. And it is there. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the entire 99 to 98, 99% that's non-coding does. And I don't think anybody can at this stage. We have various theories for what does what, including very scientific theories. Like, okay, these are regulatory components, although they're not becoming a thing, they regulate how other parts of our DNA that are expressed are regulated. That makes sense to me as a neuroscientist. And then there's also very plausible ideas that certain parts of our DNA only get activated through certain codes, maybe through certain activations. You would have heard like, oh, my DNA is activated. And what that means is certain genes get turned on that were not turned on before. And that could happen during an event. Like, we had the 8-8 portal recently, which I'm not an expert in astrology or any of that kind of stuff, but it was definitely an energetically potent time to be. And some people would say that, yeah, your DNA gets activated during that time. And that's true. That's true too. At least epigenetically speaking, during that potent energy, genes that are normally not turned on do get turned on and transcribed into proteins. And once something is a protein, it can be elicited as a behavior, your actions, your thoughts, moods, stuff like that. All right. Um, so let me see. What else do I want to say? Okay. So that's the DNA part, the genetic part of it. Not all genes get turned into proteins. And, everything that you see within your own body, including thoughts, moods, emotions, all right? Although you can't see them, they're there and they're governed, at least at the level of your brain, through certain proteins um, that genes code for. But the way that the DNA itself coils around these other proteins actually allows for the expression of certain genes. And that is where the environment comes in. So if you place yourself in an environment that is quote unquote stressful, and I've said this before, but I'll say it again, for a human being, a chronic stressor is something that has been stressing you out for at least 3 weeks or longer. Okay, so it could be a toxic relationship with a family member or maybe at your workplace. Okay, if that is a stressor that's been going on for 3 weeks or longer, I know for some of us it's like eons, lifetimes. Well, okay, that is a stressor that's going to have an impact on how your DNA gets expressed. You know, your DNA is coiled around these proteins, and when it coils around them very tightly, it actually can't be accessed by the transcription machinery. It can't actually be accessed by that machinery to turn into a protein. So it's never gonna become anything. And in a stressful environment, that is exactly what happens. Your DNA, our DNA, gets so tightly packed that it is unavailable to be transcribed and thus doesn't become a protein, doesn't go to impact anything. One example of such a gene is serotonin, let's say, the happy molecule. I'm using popular examples here so it can make as much sense to you as possible. But let's say the serotonin molecule, the happy molecule, okay? It actually becomes very tightly packed as a gene in our DNA in environments that are stressful. Okay, so no wonder you don't feel very happy in those environments because at a level of your genetics, at the DNA level, the happy molecule is it's hidden. It's hidden, can't be expressed. Whereas cortisol, so the stress hormone, which I know gets a bad rep, cortisol isn't all that bad. It's just part of our biology. But yes, in stressful environments, it's just being churned out like crazy. And that's when it does damage. Things like inflammation, mental health gets impacted, all of that. Now, cortisol actually becomes very much where the DNA, the genes that are responsible for expressing that molecule, become open or readily available for the transcription machinery to get turned into proteins and go do its thing and impact inflammation, um, our experience of life, of course. So that gives you a sense of how our environment, a stressful environment, turns cortisol on, or the gene for cortisol on, and the gene for serotonin off. However, this is the beauty of epigenetics. We can alter our environment. We can. We can actually, change our environment physically. If you're living in a toxic household, you can move out of that. If you're in a toxic workplace, you can change jobs. If you find yourself in an energetically heavy environment, you can go outside into nature and reap the benefits of that and the healing benefits of that. So in that sense, that gives us all the power over our genetic makeup, so to speak, because we can actually place ourselves in different environments. And that's why things like travel, um, even taking a different route to work every day, seeing new things, escaping the city to go into, breathe the ocean air, whatever it is, But that is us altering. That is an example of epigenetics where we alter our environment um, to support the expression of those good or feel good genes, if you will, the healthy genes, things like oxytocin, the love hormone, that molecule gets expressed in environments where we feel safe, nurtured. Um, yeah, so that's a little bit about epigenetics. Of course, there are extreme examples where like the Holocaust, right? So the people that were impacted, that experienced the Holocaust themselves, yes, they were impacted, but so was their offspring. So this is the next bit of information I wanted to say. Epigenetics, like the information of which gene gets expressed, which gene doesn't, actually gets passed on up to 4 generations down the line. I mean, personally, in science, that's been shown that 4 generations is where it's at, but I think it's like forever. The first ancestor that you had on Earth, their the way that their environment impacted them and then got imprinted on their DNA actually impacts you now. And that's why they call some people, generational curse breakers. Um, and many of us are, but in that sense we are undoing that epigenetic impact, the environment that our ancestors grew up in that was detrimental to their life. We are now undoing all that, and that is epigenetics. That is an example, prime example of epigenetics. So let's go back to the Holocaust example. The people that were in the Holocaust got impacted primarily directly as a result of it, but then the kids that they had started experiencing psychological issues and presenting at the psychiatrist saying, I've got PTSD and stuff like that, even though I wasn't in the Holocaust myself. So that is an example of epigenetics because the information from the primary caregiver got passed down the germline to the offspring, where now the genes that were suppressed during the Holocaust for those people, like, the happy molecules definitely suppressed during the time, cortisol definitely overly expressed. So that info, the way that the DNA was crumpled up or exposed, got passed down to the offspring. And now the offspring are experiencing that phenomenon, even though they're not there. Now, again, the beauty of epigenetics is that the offspring can now start to work on that and restructure the way that their DNA is expressed. They can place themselves in safe environments. And what that is totally up to you. You can go to therapy, there's all sorts of stuff. Somatic work is really important these days. Spiritual experiences, native healers, um, plant medicine, whatever environment you place yourself into is up to you, and you and what to do and what works for you. So that's the beauty of choice. That's the beauty of life as a human being. But that positive environment where you can restructure the way that your DNA gets expressed is, again, a prime example of epigenetics. And that's why I always say it's 10% genetics, 90% environment, baby. It is literally a thing I say all the time because of everything that I just mentioned. We do have the genetics that we have that code for our eye color, hair color, skin color, all of that, our serotonin levels. But then there's this whole unexamined area where our genes get turned on and off depending on where we are. That's why choose your environment wisely. And what I mean by environment is, of course, your physical, emotional, spiritual environment, your social environment. One of the biggest impacts on your brain is the social environment that you live. So if you're in a social environment that is not safe, that is triggering for you, you definitely need to swap that environment. Get yourself out of that environment because you will never heal in that environment. One of the biggest impacts on the brain is the kind of social environment you place yourself in or you find yourself in. Yeah, if you're socially isolated, all sorts of diseases go up. Metabolic diseases, stress-related conditions, mental health conditions. When you're in a social environment that's supportive, um, all that gets transformed. Okay. Again, I can't wait to just to talk more about that with the different guests that I invite on the podcast, and to show you the power of epigenetics. Now, again, if you're really interested, if you're like a parent or a healer or a teacher, and you really want to go into the nitty-gritty of epigenetics and how it relates to you, your life, or maybe your craft, the field of work that you work in, you're more than welcome to look at the course that I offer called Neuroplasticity and Epigenetics, where we go deep into this. All right. But I think that's what I want to leave you with. Just look around you, see what environment you are in, and whether it is supportive of your life and what you're up to. And if it's not, hey, it's up to you to alter it. All right. Without any further ado, I'm going to complete this episode, and I can't wait for the next episode with the incredible Dr. Tarshini, who I get to speak to again after Mercury retrograde. All right, y'all. If you love this, please subscribe, share this with someone to support their ascension process. All right, bye for now.